Good morning, everybody. My name's David Spader with Spader Business Management, and I'm here to present Developing Leaders for the Future. This is a very timely topic as many of us get ready for the new year coming up just right around the corner. And it's also top of mind in my world because I just spent the last week working with a group in our one of our leadership development programs. And so we were looking at how to prepare for the next year, looking strategically at what do we need to be doing to get ready for whatever the world has for us in the upcoming months. So to make sure everybody's on and connected, what I would like you to do is if you go ahead and go to the top of your screen, there's a little person with his hand raised there. If you click on the little arrow to the right and go ahead and go to the green checkbox, so that it turns to a green checkbox. If everyone could do that, that way I know that you are all connected and ready to go. Okay, I see several people raising their hands there. That's great. Excellent. Good to see. Again, should be at the top of your screen. There should be just a little bar there that allows you to go green. Excellent. Okay, and just to let you know, if at any time you do have a problem, you can always call us at 800-772-3377. We have our support crew ready and waiting to help you out there. Okay, let's go ahead and put that back. Let's go to raised hand again. So let's go back up there and go back to raised hand. So we'll get rid of that little checkbox, then we'll jump into the content there. All right, I see those coming back. That's excellent. Great. All right, so in our presentation today, we are going to have three objectives. The first objective will be to take a look at developing an understanding of the current leadership environment and some of those challenges. So we've got a lot of things going on right now which we have never seen before in the world. And so that's something we want to take a look at, find out what we can do about that and how to respond to that in a more proactive manner in a way that becomes an advantage to our organization. And so what are some of those unique challenges out there facing us right now? The second thing we want to do is take a look at what are the three fits to identify where we should place our leadership investments. Unless you have a really rich uncle, most of us need to be a little bit careful about how we utilize our resources. And so how do we use a guide, and we'll really look at three fits to determine where and who should we place those investments in to make sure we get the best return. And then what's that return worth? Is it worth it? It's an important question to ask. And what do typical organizations see from investing in their future managers and leaders and current managers and leaders as well? It's not just about future. And then the last thing is we'll share a little bit about a few of the offerings that Spader has, in particular our leadership development program and a few other offerings related to developing your own leadership and management or that of your leadership and management team. And so all of those ultimately objectives come down to the two C's of leadership. Okay? How do we develop the confidence and have trusting leaders in our organization? So people have confidence that the leaders are going to get the job done, but they also have a trusting relationship to them. And what we like to say is that there are two C's of leadership. The first is that we have competent leaders, and then second is that those leaders have character. So ultimately, all of these programs are built around the idea that we need to develop two criteria or two components, those two C's of leadership being competence and character. And I think you'll see how we do that throughout this program. Now, as we get started here, we'll start with a couple of questions for you. I'd like you to go ahead and answer this right here. What's your biggest leadership concern right now? So let's find out what you're thinking. Go ahead and select one of those. What do you think? What's your biggest leadership concern right now? Go ahead and select one of those. Okay, is it more improving your own leadership, the next generation of leaders, strengthening your culture? That's been a real challenge now. A lot of people are running really lean. We're in almost a full employment economy, and the economy has been good the last few years for a pretty good number of people, and we're tired. A lot of us are getting a little burned out. So how do we keep that good, positive, collaborative work environment that we're producing good results? We see several with people performance as well, some process improvement. Okay, not many in strategy or improving your own leadership. All right, well, that looks good. We'll talk about each of those particular areas as we continue to work our way through the program. Now, related to that, how confident are you in your organization that you have the ability to lead today and into the future? Let's take a look at that one there. What do you think? How confident are you that you have the skills to lead today and into the future? Are you very confident, somewhat confident, or not confident at all? And just like a lot of our groups here, it looks like we're falling into the somewhat confident. We think we have that. We've had some success to the past that we can build upon, which as leaders is always where we want to start. What's working? What are we doing well? And then continue to build on that so we can improve and become even better and keep our leadership skills ahead of that of our competitors as well. We know that's one of the few areas of competitive advantage anymore left is our leadership and the culture that we have. So thank you very much for responding to that. So let's take a look a little bit at the environment that we currently have. And we just did that poll there. I got a little ahead of myself. And so we have changing. What's changing? Customers. So let's take a look here in our chat box. Got a chat box. What do you think? Are customers becoming more or less demanding? What would you say? If you want to go ahead and answer that, your name will pop up in there just to be clear. But if we get a couple people, what do you think? Customers becoming more or less demanding? If you're like a lot of our customers, we'll see here, yep, more, absolutely. And we're seeing it's changing, right? Even if we just look at one company has changed expectations for a lot of us. It's this little company called Amazon, and they have this program called Amazon Prime, where we push a button on our computer and magically within 24 hours, we have all kinds of things showing up at our front door. That's certainly changing the game for a lot of us, and those customers are becoming more and more demanding. And so the question is, what are we doing as leaders and managers to make sure that we are responding to that changing environment and those changing customers? Because if I'm not doing something to help build my people up in a new and different way than in the past, I'm probably going to be falling behind. I've heard it said before that when you're green, you're growing, and when you're ripe, you're rot. So if we keep doing the same things, given the new environment, the odds are that we're probably going to start falling behind with regards to customers and other areas as well. Now, I'm a little bit curious as well. One of the things we're seeing a lot of, and we've seen it certainly this last week, is a lot of marketplace volatility. The highs are higher, the lows are lower. As leaders and managers, it's more important than ever that we respond very quickly. And just out of curiosity, what do you think? Well, I'm going to give you three choices, up, down, or flat. Jot here, what do you think the market's going to do next year? What's your crystal ball telling you, or your gut? Or really your best guess, because that's about all of us has. Market next year, up, down, or flat? What do you think? We've got a lot of things going on right now in the world and locally with our economies. And so what are we seeing? We're seeing flat, down, etc. Some flats, okay? Flats. I'm always curious too when we speak with our clients who are very entrepreneurial. They tend to be optimists. And so when we see flat, we wonder whether they're really thinking flat or not. But all right, great. Glad to see that. So if we're thinking about how to increase our business then for the next year, are we planning for a flat budget or are we planning up? Okay, like most entrepreneurs, we like to plan up, I'm guessing. And so what's our game plan? What are we doing significantly different if we're seeing a down or a flat market and we're planning for more profitability and or more volume? And it better start with our leaders because our leaders set the tone. And so if our leaders aren't doing something different, capitalizing on some of that will be definitely more of a challenge. So we see marketplace constantly changing. And again, when those highs are high, we're finding that if you're like a lot of our clients, they're telling us one day it's almost like the floodgates opened and they simply can't keep up with all the demand that they have. And then the next day, it's almost like a spigot. Those floodgates are turned right off and you can hear crickets chirp in their organizations. And so if that's the case, what are we doing to make sure that it's all hands on deck and we're really capitalizing when we hit those up periods? And then in those down ones, that we're taking action quickly, confidently, and knowing what we need to do. Interestingly enough, one of the things that myself and Dr. Michael O'Connor have been looking at recently is in those tougher markets, in those when we have to make those tougher management decisions, not just in the marketplace, but with employees, with customers, with processes, with strategy, we have been looking at what percentage of the time are leaders and managers in organizations effectively diagnosing the root cause of the issue. So they're oftentimes good at seeing the symptom, but what's the root cause? What do you think? What percentage of the time are leaders and managers effectively diagnosing the root cause of situations in their organizations? And sometimes that's positive as well, understanding what's causing the good to occur in their organizations. What percentage of the time, what do you think guess would be there that they're diagnosing both favorable and unfavorable situations? Okay, so we got about a 30% there. Thank you for that response. We got a few others coming in, 20, 40, 25. I'm glad to say that it's a little bit higher than that. It's about 50%. So we're roughly 50% of the time we're getting it right. But think about what the upside of that is. If we're flipping a coin and diagnosing what's causing favorable or unfavorable situations, we're getting it wrong about half the time. And if we could improve that by 20 or 30%, what could that do to our organizations in a flat market or especially in a down market? We start diagnosing that quickly. There's a lot of upside potential there that we can find. Another area of challenge around leadership that we're seeing right now is all these different generations. And a lot has been talked about millennials. It's one of the most requested topics that we get, as well as many other organizations and national associations we work with, of how do we handle all these different challenges with the millennials. And I'm sure you'll be excited to learn that millennials are a majority of the workplace right now. And they're larger than any cohort, even the boomers. And they're also quickly moving into a lot more managerial roles as well. And related to that changing, guess who's starting to enter the workforce now? Generation Z. Okay, so the millennials are we're reaching the end of the millennials, and we're ready to transition to another group of different people entering the workforce. Okay? And so we see a lot of different things, a lot of different perspectives related to changing employees. We have something going on now that's never happened in history before. We have up to 5 distinct generations in the workplace working together. Now, that hasn't happened before simply because we didn't live long enough. Okay, retirement age of 65, when that was set, most people didn't live much past 66 or 67. That's not necessarily the case anymore. Now, those that are lucky enough to retire at 65 may have another 20 to 30 years of life. And many of them plan on working a little bit more than that. And so what are those differences and how do we deal with that? What do you think the average age of baby boomers were when they had their first significant job, like a paper route or babysitting, but something that was somewhat regular? It didn't have to be full time. But what do you think about that? This is important for some of the different perspectives that we have. But what do you think? Average baby boomer was how old when they had their first job, first regular paying job? Okay, 12, 14, 13, 12, very close. It was around 11 years old. Now, let's go ahead and keep typing. How old do you think the typical millennial is when they get their first job? All right, we see 20. All right, 24, 22. Those are very close. One person hit it there, 22 years old. So there's a decade difference in workplace experience. Now, that really affects us as leaders and the way we're ready to address that, because if there's a decade of experience difference, when someone comes on board, does it make sense for us to engage those new and younger employees the same way we were engaged as a 20, 22-year-old? It really doesn't, because there's more than a decade of being in the workforce experience that they don't have. They're more educated. They come in expecting and wanting to contribute more faster, which in and of itself is great, but oftentimes they stretch and stress our system because we expect them to do what we did. Keep your head down, mouth shut, work hard for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years, and you do that, then you earn the right to have more of an opinion, and we'll start listening to some of the changes and all that you want to contribute. Just prove to us you're a good hard worker first, and then we'll give you a chance. Well, that approach doesn't work anymore. And that's going to continue to change. So how do we engage that good motivation of they want to come on and contribute significantly right away on day one? How do we leverage that motivation into something more powerful? I saw this recently, which is going to tell us it's going to become even more important. We see Generation Z as they're coming into the workforce. 66% of Generation Z needs feedback from their supervisor every few weeks or more often to stay at their job, or they're going to start looking somewhere else. That's a little bit different than a lot of us when we entered the workforce in our early days and in our early career. It's closely related to that 60% of Generation Z expects to receive their first salary increase. Do you see this? In 9 months or less. Okay? 9 months or less, they expect their first salary increase. So some radically different expectations. And so the question for us as leaders is, what are you doing differently to manage that expectation and manage it in a productive way? Because I think saying that's just not the way we work isn't going to work. We're going to have, that may be our answer, but we better be doing it in a very different way. And so we have all these different workforce changes that we have to deal with. Okay, and we have these different generations that we have to deal with. And so we have people that want to interact face to face or over the phone via email or text or some other form of interaction. And so what does that mean for us? Well, it means there's a lot of different change. And even in just looking at only the workforce, it changes in regards to what's required of our leadership. It's important that we start looking at that and understanding what's causing some of that. And as it relates to employees and that changing workforce, I've got another question here for you. Okay, and so let's go ahead and take a look at this here. What do you think? What's the best predictor of employee performance or retention, long-term retention of employees? What is the best predictor of employee retention, do you think? Okay, so is it motivation fit with the job, making sure they're passionate about what they're doing, capabilities, their ability to do the job, what they bring to the table, relationship with their supervisor? Is it related to more a strong training program or annual salary increases? All right, we see relationship with their supervisor, which is correct, is actually the most. Motivation fit's going to be important as well, but even if they're highly motivated, we find that the best predictor of retention in organizations is an employee's relationship with the supervisor. And that's becoming more and more important as well. Both the millennials and Generation Z coming in, one of the things that they really are looking for is a relationship with a mentor. They're looking for someone to guide them, help them, coach them, and to improve in their workforce. So again, that's a good motivator, knowing that they want someone to be helping them. We just have to make sure we're doing that in the right manner. So we have all these changes. By the way, when we start thinking about those millennials, when I'm speaking with older generations, a lot of times I always hear the things that they're frustrated about with the next younger generation coming in. I think that's a little bit unfair. I have yet to ask anyone who said, when your generation was entering the workforce, did the generation older than them stop and say, boy, I think this younger generation does everything the way we want them to do it? And what we find is that most of us say, no, that older generation had a little different worldview, different expectation, and was maybe a little tougher on the younger generation. So some things never change, I guess. But one of the positives in looking at that younger generation is that if we know how to engage them, okay, they actually tend to be significantly more adaptable. And there's been several studies recently that have shown that the youngest generation coming in is very adaptable. Now, the interesting thing is, if we're not as adaptable as leaders, that puts strain on us and our organizations. The other thing, though, is that change is their normal. If you think about someone who's 20, 25 years old, who was born in the mid to late 90s, their entire world has been changed. Everything they've seen has been the rate of change that for many that are a little bit older is still newer. And so for them, that's the new normal. And that's the good news because as the world continues to change, if we learn how to harness that, that only helps put us at advantage. Interestingly enough, one of the most in one of the industries we work in, they have a service shop where they do repair work. And one of the highest performing departments I found was a group of technicians that are all less than 30, and they have a manager who really understands how to engage them. They work collaboratively together. They outperform many other locations in that same business because they've got one of those leaders that's figured that out and how to do something with that. But that change oftentimes leaves us feeling a little bit like this. Okay, I'm guessing a few of you have felt like that before as well. And so then what do? We go looking for solutions, and what do we feel like? When we're leading in changing times, it feels a little bit like this many times. We've got all this information coming at us. Recently, I Googled leadership, manager, thinking, if I'm in your shoes, how am I going to go get information? I go out to Google, right? How many hits do you think I got? If I Googled leader, manager, how many hits? Right? That internet, that's where we go for information. That should be helpful, right? How many hits do you think I got? All right, here we got a couple, 10,000. Oh, that's a good start, thousands. We're going to have to up that just a little bit. Let's see what else we have here. All right, we're still there with 100,000s. They're getting a little bit closer. We need a few more zeros on that. There we go, Ed, getting even more. All right, so great, thank you. What we actually got was well over 1 billion hits. So I want to look at those resources and become better at my leadership and management. What happens? I'm inundated. I feel like this picture here. What do I do with that? It doesn't help. And so we'll start transitioning now in a minute into what are the few criteria we have to look at in order to make sure that we're selecting the right leaders, that we're developing our own leadership in the right way. And it really boils down to 3 fits. But before we do that, let's take a look at what's the impact we have as leaders. This is research from Harvard Business Review Press, and in one of their books, Primal Leadership, which is a good read. 75% of cases, organizational climate or culture alone sorted companies into higher versus lower profitability or growth. So what did that mean? Okay, so that simply means that if you know what to look for, you can go into an organization, never look at a single financial indicator, and predict whether they're a higher performer or lower performer 3 out of 4 times simply based on the culture, the way they're working together, what their mindset is, whether they're more positive or more negative, whether they tend to be more collaborative between departments or other silos. So 3 out of 4 times. So we know that that's pretty strong. So what do you think? How much more productivity and climate, which are part of the same thing, is directly related to the actions of the leader? So how much of a company's culture or climate is directly related to the actions of the leader? What do you think here? Let's go ahead and respond to that. How much of a company's culture and climate? We know that leadership sets the tone oftentimes. And so how much impact do we really have? All right, looks like we're getting some pretty common responses there. 70 to 100% is the most common response that we get. So what do we think? Let's take a look at what the results are telling us. Okay, so what the results are telling us is that, and the research is that we can't quite control everything. It would be nice if we could. So that 70 to 100% is a little bit too high, but 50 to 70% of climate is directly related to the actions of the leader. So what does that mean? If I walk into my company, my department, a team meeting, and the climate's not what I expect it to be, and I'm in a leadership role, where's the first place I should look? In the mirror, right? Because at least half of that climate and culture is directly related to the actions of the leader. So we know that we have a significant impact on that. And that's one of the reasons why it's a great place to invest in. And so, what does it mean bottom line? So, what does that tone mean? So, if we do set that right tone, have that good positive culture, what's it mean? Well, here's what it tells us. Okay, organizational climate accounts for 20 to 30% of business performance, meaning that bottom line difference, you can account for 20 to 30% difference based on the actions of the leader in that culture. So if you think about a down market or a flat market and you're saying, hey, we need to be more profitable, we want to continue to get better in the next year, what's something that you can do with if that market stays flat and you're not able to get more market share? If you're able to strengthen your culture, and you're going from one that's not real strong to one that's a lot better, there's 20 to 30% you're leaving on the table just in the environment and creating that environment, good, positive, results oriented environment where we're working together, achieving together, have a good purpose. We can increase that much. That's why it's so important. And how about yourself? What do you think? If you think about your organization, how much more productivity do you think you could get from your people with great leadership and management? Let's see, we'll give you another poll here. With great leadership and management, how much more productivity do you think you could get in your organization? How much is out there? We get great leadership and management, maybe beyond what we have today. What are we seeing? 20, 15, 20? Yep, typically what we see is most land in that 20+%. Now, take a minute and think about what that means. Your company's volume was what last year? How much revenue did they have? If you could add, even if it's 15%, which our lowest responses are, what does that do? Even if it's 10% more revenue at the same margin or the same efficiencies, what does that do to your bottom line? And what other investments have that type of return? And so that's the very real productivity increase we see from organizations that really do a good job in investing in their leaders. And they see that direct result. And it can be a little harder sometimes because it's not a concrete, easy to see thing quite as much, but it definitely, that return is definitely there. Now, it's not just Spader that says that. We see that in our 20 groups consistently, where sometimes literally we know people that are across the street from each other, and we see very different performance. But this is research done by the leadership experts at Burson and Associates. And what they found was that companies that regularly invest significantly in their leaders have 26% more revenue per employee, 40% less turnover, and are significantly less likely to have to lay people off in a recession. And they've been conducting this research for multiple years now, and they consistently see that. And that can make sense. Let's just take a look at a couple examples. What happens if we have a leader who gets that 10%? So most of you said more, but 10% improvement on $1.5 million salesperson, someone who's selling $1.5 million, 10% is another $150,000 of revenue. If we get to that 20%, that's $300,000 of revenue from one person. Now, what happens if we go to 4 people? Okay, now we're looking at $600,000, and at a 15% margin, that's an additional gross profit of over $90,000 we have. But think about that. Even if it's 10% increase, that's almost over $500,000 of revenue. So in a down market or a flat market, can we go out and can we get that extra? So leadership's a good place to be thinking about in a down market. How do we get more out of what we have without having to invest in significantly more? All right, so when we take a look at that, when do most leaders get trained? When do most leaders get trained? And when should we start investing? Well, those are two very different questions. On average, when leaders start supervising people, after they start supervising, how long is it before they typically get their first leadership training? What do you think? How many years after when most people start supervising people do you think they get their first training in how to supervise and manage people? All right, 5 years, 4 years, 2 years, 3 years. I'm glad to see we have lots of optimists. Okay, good. I'm hoping that's in your organization because unfortunately that's not quite what we're seeing in other organizations. So what we're seeing there is that only 24% of leaders get leadership training within the first 1 to 2 years of when they begin supervising people. That means 76% typically get their training significantly after that. Over half of all leaders, and it's actually closer to 60% of all leaders, it's right around 8 to 10 years plus is the first time they get trained in how to effectively lead and manage after they've been doing it. And so the benefit is in our leadership program, one of the things I'm starting to see, and I'm very encouraged by the fact that I now have some people, we have a percentage of people that are high potential employees that are just preparing to lead and manage their people. And it's, you'll see a little bit later, I think it's 17% if I remember right, are people that are learning before they get into a leadership role. And that's really a great place to be because they don't develop any bad habits. They start by developing the right habits. And we see this in particular for many of you. I know you're in family businesses, but that becomes even more important. And we see here, how early should we start? Well, those organizations that start 10 plus years out and looking at preparing the next generation for owning the business, they're still in business. 85% of them are still in business 15 years later. If we drop below that 10-year period, we're flipping a coin now. And we drop below that, it gets even worse. And so we know that we have a lot more options the longer we start out. And also, we like to see people prove that they can do the job before they get into the job. And so that's where a lot of organizations make a mistake with high performers, in the sense that they'll take someone, and I just was dealing with that the other day. I got a call from someone said, I just promoted this person because they said they really wanted it, and they're a high producer in their role, and so I put them in the job. And said, okay, what were your concerns before you put them in this job? Well, they're not always a very good team player. They're not always very good about the details. And so, we're seeing that now with them as a leader. And my response was, as we talked about it, was what could we, number one, let's discuss this and how to handle this and coach this employee. But number two, how do we avoid making this decision in the future? And so how do we look at and make sure that they have to prove that they can do the job first, and that becomes the carrot. And the real leaders will have no problem. We'll see great improvement by putting that carrot out there before a title, slowly developing the skill sets proactively. And we actually spent about 3 or 4 hours in our leadership development program just on Wednesday discussing how we can sequence the development of those high potentials in a way that they develop and prove they're capable of that managerial role ahead of time. And interestingly, one of our leadership development participants said, yeah, I've been implementing this. I've been doing this with one of my employees. And you know what we found? We found that as they got into some of that managerial work, they really didn't like it. And so now they're questioning, do I really want to be a manager? Which is a great question to ask right now before they're in that role. And so we want to start looking at that more proactively. We have some great tools to do that. And a common area around that, by the way, is oftentimes we see people in technical roles that want to be managers, maybe become a service manager from a technician role, for example. We might see that. We'll see. However, when I ask most people in those industries, what do most technicians least like? And they say, well, they're not always the most extroverted people, so interacting with people is something they don't necessarily enjoy, nor is paperwork. So 2 P's, right? People and paperwork. But what's 95% of a service manager's job? Well, it's people and paperwork. But then we're surprised when it doesn't work out. But if they're not motivated to do the job, it's not likely that they're going to do well. And we see that as well, the ability to work with and through people. Why do leaders fail? The single greatest reason 7 out of 10 leaders don't make it because their inability to work with and through people. 68%. And so that's a great place to start. Why is that? And we'll talk about that a little bit. Developing some of that self-awareness is a critical first step of what we need to do to make sure that leaders are more capable and that they're understanding themselves as well. And as it relates somewhat to that, what do you think? Let's take a look at another poll here. What percentage of current leaders do you think currently have a blind spot limiting their effectiveness? What do you think? Which one of these is closest? What percentage of leaders currently have at least one significant blind spot limiting their effectiveness? All right, so there we're seeing 60 to 80%. Okay, our two biggest responses. Well, the answer is actually around 80%. About 80% of all leaders have a significant blind spot limiting their performance. That's one of the reasons we use a lot of assessments. We gather feedback from 360 feedback from in multiple different areas in our leadership development program in order to reduce that, so that we're not falling into that 80% that have a blind spot. All right, so where do we place our bets? Where do we put our resources when we're looking at leaders? Should I be investing in myself? Should I be investing in others? Let's take a look at that now. And there's three different fits we want to look at. Fit number one is a culture fit. So ultimately determining, do they fit with the beliefs, actions, values required for our company to be successful ongoing? And so what do you think? Why is that so important as leaders? Well, we saw earlier 50 to 70% of the environment is directly related to a leader. And so making sure that they're the model, and they don't have to be perfect, but that they're a model that others look to for how we want to do business is really important. And said another way, not so much research oriented, but how many would agree that one person can have a significant influence on the environment of your business? What do you think? Would you agree with that or would you disagree? One person can have a significant influence on the environment of your business. You would agree? Absolutely, we agree. And our leaders have more ability to influence that environment than anyone else. And so learning about their verbal and nonverbal becomes critical importance. Learning how to communicate with an employee in a way that's not just successful or we get them to do something, but also satisfying. And we say that when doing that, at the end of interactions, regardless of whether it's with a person, one employee, with a department or a team, or with customers, or with even vendors, what are our leaders doing to make sure they get commitment instead of compliance? And the challenge is, because we have authority as leaders and managers, we often get compliance. And we can get that. We can get heads to nod up and down and people to say, yes, I'll do it, boss. But compliance is not different than commitment. How do we know whether that's happening or not? Well, what happens when the manager or leader leaves? If there's commitment, performance continues. If there's compliance, it doesn't. And so what do we have to do? And it starts with being that model of what we expect and are seeking in our organizations. Setting that tone, having that shared purpose, making sure we win together, and acknowledging that, celebrating that, and helping people continue to get better. And so we do several things. This is a big summary of a culture fit assessment we look at in our leadership development program. And so what do we see? We see a self view here, their direct reports, and their supervisors. So with integrity, this person felt like they were very high. They were a great model. Their employees, the people that reported them, and their supervisors said, no, you're okay. Okay, so that was important to understand. This leader is doing something with regards to that integrity value. And in this case, it's not necessarily that they were being unethical. It relates to their communication practices. And because they're naturally more of an introvert, people don't know what they're thinking. They actually are doing a lot of things for other people, but others don't know it. And we being a more humble individual, they don't want to place themselves or try and puff their chest in front of others to be seen as really important. However, they do need to explain why they're doing things so others can emulate that and see that they're really a team player. Everyone's in agreement on teamwork. What do we see about quality? We see three different views. And again, this is very common. That's why we recommend every 2 to 3 years, a leader do some sort of 360-degree feedback, because You want to get that feedback, and as environments change, as different people come in, it changes, and our blind spots can change significantly. So, if nothing else, you take away from this, go out, get some good 360 feedback. Make sure you have someone who can help you interpret it effectively, but you need to be doing that every 2 to 3 years in order to make sure that we don't have a blind spot that's really keeping us from being successful. Now, as it relates to that first culture fit and looking at where we place our investment for our leaders, this starts with our high potential employees and those people that are desiring to move up in our organization and grow. And so that should be our first explanation when they say, "Hey, I'd like to be a manager here one day, or I want to be a supervisor, or I want more pay." All right, let's talk about this, because culture drives everything else in our organization. We really want to start with culture fit first. And so if you have that superstar, quote, superstar, high producing salesperson, technician, whatever it might be, then they produce a lot. However, they don't demonstrate the company's values. The first area I want to work with is I want to have a conversation with them about the fact that they're a high producer, not a high performer. And that differentiation is important. High performers are aligned with the company culture and put up good numbers and are highly productive. High producer is someone who just puts up big numbers but isn't in alignment with our culture. So looking at where do we place our leadership development investments, we always start with culture fit first. And part of that comes with the shared purpose that we're in this together. One of the things we see is that more than ever, the younger generations coming into the workforce, they want to feel a part of something more than just a paycheck. And so what are we doing to create that culture of purpose that we have? And there's a lot of opportunity here if you're one of the organizations that does that really well. This research just came out this last year where 75% of executives in the US believe that companies act in the best interest of society. So leaders of organizations are saying, we're contributing good, positive things to the society. What do you think when it comes to consumers, non-executives? Well, I won't make you guess on this one. It's only 40% believe that companies are acting in the best interest of society. And so we see this big gap. But if we believe that an organization is acting, what does that do as far as a strategic advantage for you and your company? That you're one of the few organizations, or fewer minority of organizations, that are really doing what's right to build that society that we want and being good citizens of the world and of our country. So that's really the first fit, culture. We've got a big opportunity there, and that's actually one of the biggest gaps we see in organizations is the perception of what our culture is from the top of the organization to the bottom. And research tells us that the higher you move up the organizational chain in an organization, the less accurate view you have of the culture. And that's often a function of distance, because as organizations grow, as you move 1, 2, 3, 4 levels of management away from the front lines, it's a lot harder to feel that. So we talk about how to measure that and ways that we can measure that in basic ways. We've got a culture assessment we teach in our leadership program. It takes most people about 10 minutes to really assess their culture in depth within their own department or organization. And then we've got more complex ones that could take a little bit more when we're ready at that time. But we want to start with what's that tool we can use every day, doesn't take very long to do, and take action on. So our first fit is always culture. Our second fit then becomes satisfaction. So where are we going to place our leadership investments? Okay, is it a satisfaction or motivation fit? And that's another way to say that. So what do we have to do to make sure that people are in a role that they are motivated to do? And so what's passionate? What are they passionate about? What are those deeply held interests, etc., that will drive the type of work that they have? So they see meaning inherent in their work, which we know helps people be much more productive, is when they enjoy the work for the sake of the work. And believe it or not, some people like doing the same thing over and over again. There's an interest that we measure called the routines work interest. And there are people that The more routine the work is, the more passionate they are about it. Now, that may not be for most of us, okay, but we all have roles like that in our organization. And so understanding what the role requires and what someone's core motivators are really help that. Here's a summary of one individual that we saw that we did a 360 on. So we had their view and others. And so what do we see? We see more interacting, more outgoing, people-oriented was the way they viewed themselves. However, others said you're more task-oriented, more direct, more firm, kind of a little bit more of a command and control type personality. So a little difference there. Now their values were more we-oriented, which was great. They saw it, others saw it. So they both said, yep, this is someone who's in it for the team. They're doing it, they're putting others before themselves. So great on the values motivation fit. So 2 of the 3 motivation fits we look at. One's a little bit different. The second one, probably the most important in this one, is on the same page. So we'd be feeling good about this person. They've got a few blind spots when it comes to style, okay, but values-wise, this is someone who's in it for the organization and the team. They're someone we can work with that's going to feel an obligation to improving. And what else do we see around their motivation? So we see that helping work interest, a relational work interest, and entrepreneurial. So those are great motivators for certain roles. Maybe not quite as good in other roles, but what did others see? Instead of helping, others said, well, we feel like they're more have authority work interests. So they're not trying to help us, they're trying to tell us what to do. Okay, so this would be an example of someone has the right values, but needs to work on diagnosing what their approach is, because others aren't seeing it as helping, they're seeing it as a command and control. So even though the intent is good, which is probably what happens about 80% of the time, their approach needs to change to get the benefit from that intent. And so learning how to engage those leaders would be important for this particular individual. So that's our first fit. Our first fit, remember, was culture. Our second fit is satisfaction or motivation. We have multiple ways to look at that, getting feedback from others to increase our understanding. Okay, and why do you think that would be important? What do you think is the best predictor? We'll do another poll here. What do you think is the best predictor of long-term leadership performance? What do you think here? What's the best predictor of long-term leadership performance? Is that inspirational, charismatic type leader? We hear a lot about that, the ability to resolve conflicts, self-awareness, being directive. We see a lot of, looks like we're going to, since I basically just said that, it makes sense, right? That self-awareness is actually the best predictor of long-term leadership performance. Where are those areas where I'm motivated to perform, where I'm good at performing, where I'm not good at performing? Both of those are equally as important. It was great. I had someone yesterday after our leadership program was over stop me and they said, hey, I'm really struggling in this area. I do a great job in these 3 areas, and other people tell me I do a great job in these areas, but this is an area I'm really concerned about that I know I need to be significantly better at. And I'm learning that I need to be a lot better at that now. And previous to this session, I thought I was good at it. Now that I've increased my understanding, I realize I've got a way to go. So what can I do between now and the next session to help really put that into practice so I can continue to improve? All right, great. Thank you for answering another one of our polls. So that brings us to our third fit. So once we've gotten the culture fit, and once we have our satisfaction motivation fit, now we look at capabilities and performance fit as the third fit for where to put your leadership investment. Okay, and so that is because if someone's capable but they're not motivated, they're not likely to continue to perform well. If they're capable but they don't fit with our culture, okay, they may change our culture in ways we don't want it. We see this a lot of times in professional sports, those prima donna athletes that end up destroying the culture of an organization. They're capable, but they're not good team members. They don't want to do or aren't motivated to do what's necessary for the team, only for what they want themselves. And so capabilities really isn't the issue. Unfortunately, when people are hiring, managing, developing people, they usually look at how do we develop capabilities first, then worry about motivation and culture second. But that's backwards management. We need to think about it the other way first. Give me an employee with no capabilities who's highly motivated, who has the right culture and is a good culture fit, and 80 to 90% of the time, we're going to be able to turn them into a really good employee in a fairly short period. And so that's why we really want to look at those fits in that particular area. After this session, what we can also do is we'll send out a quick fit for you with these 3 areas. We'll send you a worksheet if you want that. So keep an eye out for that in the next day or two. And we'll send you a quick assessment on those 3 fits for looking at your leadership team and where you can place your investment. And we're not looking for people to be perfect in all 3 of those fits. What we're looking for is people that are growth oriented. And so if they're growth oriented, they're willing to learn and they're willing to commit to getting better in those 3 areas, then we're willing to put some investment in them. However, if we're not seeing the right fit or intent in those 3 areas, then we need to have a more serious conversation about what needs to happen so that we see them demonstrating that minimum threshold before we invest. I recently had that conversation the other day, actually. Someone was interested in joining our leadership program. And so what we did was we had a conversation, and actually one of the issues there was around adaptability, capability. And I previously worked with this person before, good, hard worker, has learned a lot, but not quite ready for a major investment in their leadership yet. We said, there's still a few things. Let's get this worked on a little bit, and let's circle back a year from now and look and see if you've done these things. Then we'll, as an organization, I think it makes sense to really invest in your leadership at that time to show that they demonstrate that commitment ahead of time. If you have questions about that, by the way, I'd be more than happy to chat with anyone about how we go about determining that, since it's a little more individualized or changes based on everyone's unique situation. But here's another assessment that we use is around adaptability. All the things of change, all the aspects of change we talk about, and we know adaptability is quickly becoming the single greatest predictor of performance with regards to capabilities of all employees. And just so you know, we have 4 primary types of solutions that we offer to help leaders develop their skills. The first one is our leadership development program, which is what we'll discuss here a little bit more. It's 5 days, 2.5 to 3 day sessions over 18 months. So what we tend to do there is we meet for those 2.5 days. We have a few assignments where you implement, not too long. I'll tell you a little bit more about the assignments in a minute. But roughly every other week, we have a brief assignment to make sure you're using the information, that you're developing the skill sets there. We come back, reinforce, fine tune, then build on that foundation at the next session and continue to do that for about an 18-month period. Dealer Canada is a new program, and that's what's focused on not just some of those management principles, but also operational, and those that tend to be more industry specific. So that's a little different. So 2 days, 2 of those 4 sessions are more operational, 2 are more management oriented. Our Effectively Leading and Managing program is for anyone who manages people from the top of the organization down to frontline supervisors. That's a 2.5 day program. And we also have, and I'll explain it here in a minute, our Next Level Leadership program for more managers that have been in roles a little bit longer or more senior management. But the other one that's really available to everybody is Leadership and Management Coaching and Consulting. So this would be individualized solutions based on what your challenges are. I know I'm going to jump in on one of those here in about 2 hours after we're done here, and where we're focusing on preparing someone to lead their family business. And so we've been coaching now for about 6 months, seeing some good, strong progress. But that was definitely something that we had some development opportunities that were really more of a coaching issue, and they needed that direct feedback one-on-one more so than something they would pick up in a class. So all of those are different options. Now, interesting, let's think about this here a little bit as we look at where to place our leadership investment. Our leaders like fine wine. What do you think? Our leaders like fine wine. Do they tend to get better with age? What do you think? Yes or no? We'll do a quick. Let's go ahead and no, yes. It may depend on where we are in our career. Maybe, maybe not. That's probably the most accurate answer. Some do, some don't. But in general, we see an interesting pattern as leaders tend to age. And so, what's the pattern that we see with leaders? Well, let's take a look at that. All right, so this is with more than 30,000 managers. And what they asked was, according to age, how, from their employees' perspective, those that work for them, how effective are they in their role? And so we see starting in that 25 to 35 range is actually the most highest percentage of people are viewed as highly effective leaders. And what happens over time? The trend is going in the wrong direction. So we're not necessarily doing a great job leveraging that experience that we have because we're going in the wrong direction here. Okay, and why might that be? Are most human beings highly adaptable? Most human beings like change. If you answer no to those, which most people do, what happens? Well, what made us successful here, we often tend to keep doing even as we get older, and it may become less and less effective unless we do things like we talked about. That's why self-awareness is one of the best predictors of long-term leadership performance, because the most self-aware leaders understand that what worked when I was 25 and 35 won't work when I'm 50 plus. Why? Well, has the world changed much in the last 25 years? If the answer is yes, then the question is, what do I need to do differently to manage in that particular environment? All right, and targeting those leaders that have been in leadership roles is our next level leadership workshop, which is a new workshop for us. It's 3.5 days long, with a half day optional implementation work session where I take off my trainer hat and then put on a coaching hat. And we'll work with you on developing an individualized plan for how you can take those tools and implement them. And so we also offer a couple of new tools we haven't offered before in a workshop type setting. One of them is around individual adaptability, assessing your own adaptability. And then the other one is new strategic tools and really starting to learn, how do I develop strategy? Okay, so this is more of those developed leaders and senior level leaders and managers in key roles there. Now, a little bit more about our leadership development program, and then we'll be wrapping up here in about the next 3 or 4 minutes. It's an 18-month-long program, 5 sessions, 3 days each. We do have follow-up and implementation between sessions. Note this is required. So we want people that are serious about getting better. If you're not willing to do that, then this might not be the program for you. And lastly, we do a graduation ceremony at the last session. So we have really nice way to do that, to recognize the good work that we've done in each other. The bottom line, the leadership program is built on these foundations. First and foremost, it's about learn yourself, lead yourself. So building that self-awareness about where are my strengths, where are my development opportunities, how do I leverage my strengths and minimize those areas that might keep me from being more effective. Then it's how do I lead and manage others. Then looking a little bit broader, my team or department, and then leading and managing an entire organization. And what are the key tools required to do that? And really, we boil it down to 4 different types. So understanding that there's billions of hits out there on the internet for all these different leadership tools, it boils down to a couple different things. One is managing people. That's this green one. So how do I manage myself and manage others? And so we start that in session 1, continue to reinforce that all the way through session 5. Then we look at culture and how do we build that environment, a culture of high teamwork and productivity and profitability. That should be part of our culture. Continue to build on that with our strategic development, and then focusing on processes, tools, and additional ways that we can refine those as leaders and managers. And there are multiple tools in each one of those. And a couple different types of leadership and management programs as well. We have programs that are open to everybody. Okay, and so those would be ones, multiple industries. And then we have those that are also more private. So the more private ones are those that would be held just by 1 or 2 organizations where we can even customize the leadership development there. And who's the leadership program for? Just to give you an idea, this is one of our current leadership programs running. We have GMs and CEOs, and those over 50 years of age, about 17%. Those under 50 that are GM CEOs, and I would also include some owners in there. So we see about 40% are GM CEOs or rapidly moving in that direction. Senior managers and directors, we've got about 13%. This varies up to 20% depending on what organization we're in. See department managers and supervisors about 30%, and high potentials in that 70% or 17% range. So we've got a good mix there. And while it's a little different range, I remember being with one group one time and being a little concerned. I had partnered someone who was a high potential with someone who was nearing their end of their career, a CEO. And I was thinking, oh, this is going to be interesting. And at the end, they both said it was wonderful. The younger person said, I loved all the experience and that they had and what they were able to share. And the older CEO said, it was really good for me to remember what it's like to be new and young in an organization. It's been so long that in this case, this really helped strengthen that understanding. And what types of results do we see? Here's a great example of Jane is actually one of our leadership development participants. I apologize here, but looks like my slide's not working quite here. But what happened is that Jane went from having only 13% strengths on a leadership assessment to, after her leadership development, she had more than 55 items on that leadership development were seen as strengths. So that's a pretty significant increase. And we also looked at what were significant weaknesses that Jane had. Well, in looking at Jane's weaknesses, ones that could derail her career that were really concerning, they went from 22% all the way down to 3%. So from 22 down to 3. So we're pretty confident she's going to be very successful now because she did all the right things. She took all those tools and continued to improve. So that was certainly a change that we're willing to feel good about investing in her. And just briefly, a couple more things here before we begin to wrap up. What are some other results? We talked earlier about 50% of leaders not being able to effectively diagnose different situations. Okay, and so in looking at that, what we've seen is that as we record that, we've seen significant improvement. And as they've done that, they've done it by learning how to better lead and manage others, several different assessments. And from session 1, only less than 55% of the time diagnosing correctly what leadership approach to use and what the root cause is, to well over 80% by session 3. So, and that tends to stay solid throughout by sessions 4 and 5. So we're confident that that really is a skill that they have once they go back into their organizations. We also do a company improvement project. Just an example as part of that. Here's an example of one where an individual focused on their warranty filing time. They went from an average of 29 days all the way down to 18. Okay, so a great improvement. The interesting thing is the manager set an original goal of 14. He didn't believe it could get done to get below 20. So, setting a stretch goal for sure. He was okay with getting it under 20. He got to 18.7. He said, let's start working on another area. His employees then wouldn't let him. He said, I learned how to work with them now, and they were so excited and so motivated by the fact that they had created such improvement that they were absolutely even more dedicated and committed to getting to that 14 days than I was. So he said, it's kind of nice because as I learned how to do this, they started pushing me more than me pushing them. And then they increased their first-time approval rate of warranty utilizing the leadership development tools all the way up to 97%. So they increased it by over 21%. So we see some really good increase performance, and we do that as well by making sure we develop plans, we have assignments, we follow up so that leaders continue to improve. And this program as well has received some good recognition. We've only made the program significantly better since this occurred, but H.O. Penn was a Caterpillar dealer who utilized the same leadership program. and where they were recognized by Caterpillar as one of the two best leadership development programs for their dealers. So one of the two best leadership programs in the world for within the cat world at that time. And again, that may have been a few years ago, but we have only continued to build on that and make that better. If you're interested in other testimonials, we have several as well that we're more than happy to share with you. So if you have additional information or are looking for additional information, please feel free to contact us. And as we wrap up here, my final thought, one of my favorite quotes is by Peter Drucker, who says, "Only three things happen naturally in organizations: friction, confusion, and underperformance. Everything else requires leadership." And so if you're feeling like it might be time to help strengthen and beef up, sharpen that saw on your own leadership or that of some of your management team, we'd love to hear from you. Please feel free to contact us with any questions that you have. And you can contact us for any of those particular programs we talked about, or services or coaching. We'd be more than happy to talk with you about that. And lastly, our next leadership development program is beginning January 15th through 17th in 2019. And we'll be kicking that off shortly. And we look forward to hopefully having some of you there. And again, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to spend with us to learn a little bit more about the best ways to develop future leaders in your business, remembering of those 3 fits to focus on: culture fit, satisfaction fit, and performance fit. And we'd love to have you in one of our leadership development programs sometime in the next year or so. Please contact any of our staff there. The information is there if you have those, or if you just have questions about a leadership or management challenge that you face. With that, thank you again for taking time to be with us. Have a wonderful day and happy holidays to all.